Welcome to Engage, leading conversations that matter. Join in the conversation. Send an email to engage@cfpublic.org. Send a recorded talkback message on the free Central Florida Public Media app. Leave a voicemail by calling 407-273-2300, extension 246. Engage is made possible with the support of listeners like you.
You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. It's Thursday, October 17th. I'm Richard Copeland, sitting in for a vacationing Sharon Stone. Coming up, we'll break down the nuances of Florida's Amendment 4 ballot measure that would overturn the state's 6-week abortion ban. Also, we'll explore ways to alleviate the voter stress and anxiety that accompanies the political rhetoric and divisiveness of high-stakes campaigns. And Central Florida Public Media's One Small Step chronicles a conversation between an area pastor and a theme park performer. But first, last week the USDA released its citrus crop forecast for the 2024-25 season. The agency predicted a total output of 15 million boxes of orange crop. This is 3 million boxes less than the previous season, and this forecast was issued before Hurricane Milton hit. Additionally, the USDA is predicting a 22% drop in grapefruit output. After the storms blew off into the Atlantic last Thursday, Central Florida citrus farmers have had time to reevaluate this year's projected output. Industry experts estimate that 70% of the region's citrus acreage was affected by Milton, and farms have struggled in recent years to recover from previous hurricanes and have spent nearly 2 decades fighting off a bacterial disease known as citrus greening that has decimated citrus crops. Florida Citrus Mutual is the state's largest trade association for citrus growers. Earlier today, I spoke with Matt Joyner, the Mutual's executive vice president and CEO, about the state of the region's industry post-Milton. I began our conversation by noting the prevalence of tornadic activity in the area, and I asked Joyner if all the growers in his network had reported in safely.
All of our growers have checked in. Everybody is well personally, and you're right, there were some tornadoes center part of the state, and over on the East Coast in particular, there were quite a few that were close calls, had some packing houses and other things damaged, but all of our growers are safe.
Good to hear. Thank you. So it's been nearly a week since Milton left the area. What are you hearing from Central Florida growers about the impact to their property and to their crop?
Sure. Well, so preliminary estimates are starting to come in, and certainly a lot of fruit on the ground. Probably not as much tree damage, not as many toppled trees, that sort of thing, is what we've seen maybe in past storms, but definitely we're seeing split trees laid over. But this is definitely a wind event that impacted the fruit that was on the tree, a lot of heavy fruit that was, in many instances just about ready to harvest. And so it was pretty susceptible to these winds. And of course, a week out, what we are hearing from folks that had already sort of checked in maybe Friday or Monday is that fruit's continuing to drop, which we would expect with the trees taking the kind of a beating they did with the wind, a lot of stem twist and stress on those trees. And so we're continuing to see fruit hit the ground, unfortunately.
And what does it mean that this happened so close to the harvest season?
Yeah, well, as I said, I think that for one thing, we just had heavier fruit, very susceptible. And so a lot of our early oranges that we would be getting in there and moving over the next month are unfortunately, going to be on the ground rather than at the processing plants and the packing houses. But we're going to get in there, get the fruit off the trees that is still there. We feel good about our ability to harvest what's left and moving into the spring, into our Valencia crop. We're optimistic that maybe that fruit is going to be retained a little more on the tree. And so second half of the season, we hope will be better.
Now, right before, almost immediately before Milton made landfall, the USDA dropped their forecast for the 2024-25 growing season that indicated a near 16% decrease in production. What does that output look like now after Milton?
We're really still sort of assessing, and as I mentioned, there's still fruit that's coming off the trees. I think we're probably still another maybe week out from understanding the full impacts, but we know it's going to be down. And obviously that is a 16% decrease from last season. We weren't totally shocked by that. We've had a lot of improvements in tree health, along with these hurricanes that we've had now. Three major hurricanes in the last 7 years. We've been battling citrus greening for 2 decades, but research has yielded some tools that are just in the last 18, 24 months being deployed in the groves. Tree health was looking a lot better. Pretty optimistic about the direction that is going. But unfortunately, over the last 2 years since Hurricane Ian, we've also seen 100,000 plus acres of citrus go out of production from that prior hurricane, and a lack of any real resources in terms of disaster assistance to help the growers recover from that storm. So, we're balancing what we know is improved tree health, and we think the path forward in the light of greening being endemic in our groves, with the fact that we've lost a fair amount of acreage as a result of prior hurricanes.
And to a large degree, we're talking about this in terms of the growers, their operations. What about some of the ancillary economy attached to the citrus industry, the people who work on the farms and some of the businesses surrounding the shipping businesses, the processing businesses, the totality of the industry? Is it too early to assess any kind of impact on that economy?
It's early to assess, but certainly it's always a concern of ours. When you look at the Florida citrus industry, we're almost a $7 billion economic generator to the state of Florida. And most of that economic generation is in rural areas of the state where there's not a whole lot of other opportunities. So when you think about the tractor dealerships and the Ford dealerships and the cafes and other things in these rural communities, the families that are supported by this industry, it is obviously of great concern to us that those communities and those people are able to be taken care of as well. And so that ancillary impact is always of concern to us.
From a consumer standpoint, how long would it be until we saw the impact insofar as prices at the supermarket?
Represent growers. I'm not an expert on the economics of retail prices on orange juice. I know better about grower contracts, but I can tell you that certainly we've got a global supply issue when it comes to citrus. When you look at all the major citrus producing regions around the world, whether it be citrus greening or weather events, we're seeing constraints in that global supply that are obviously putting an upward price on juice at retail. And so, as far as Florida goes, we're going to harvest the crop we have. We think that we're going to be able to supply the consumers with the Florida orange juice that they've come to know and love. But certainly, when you look at the holistic picture of citrus, there's some interesting things going on right now.
A lot of the pricing is determined by the fact that oranges are traded as a futures commodity.
Yes, again, I'd probably be getting a little bit out of my lane, talking about that, but certainly the futures price of FCOJ would have some impact, I would think.
Sure. And we talked a little bit about the citrus greening, and we know that in recent seasons, there's been great strides taken. Growers are seeing a very positive effect in combating greening. In any way, does this set back any of those efforts, the impact of Milton?
I think that improved tree health is going to help these trees hopefully to recover. We know that after every storm, it's a multi-year process for a tree to get back to where it was pre-storm production. It's easily a 2-3 year process, but we think that obviously the trees going into it in better health, and then the ability to have these tools moving forward as we rehabilitate these groves is going to be important for the grower. And, we're just very optimistic that we finally have some solutions for what has been a very difficult disease. And if we can stop having these storms come over to the top of us every season or two, then I think the growers can get some breathing room and really see these groves start to thrive again.
And from the grower's perspective, we've mentioned we're 2 years since trying to recover from Ian and a lot of acreage lost, multiple hurricanes in the last decade that have compounded in addition to the greening. When you talk to these growers, we know about the resilience of the American agricultural community, but we also know a lot of these smaller operations are multi-generational, struggling to stay in there and keep the farms running season after season. What is the general tenor from the growers, from that community? Is it, do they feel like they're struggling an uphill battle, or is there sort of a general positivity about the industry moving forward?
I think it's combined. There's obviously a little bit of a frustration to have been seeing what we're seeing in terms of tree health and going into what we had hoped was going to be sort of a turning point season to have this storm hit us. But nonetheless, there is a lot of optimism, and I think that comes from the fact that, again, we've battled hurricanes, we've battled freezes, we've battled these sort of things for over 100 years in the state of Florida, and yet this is a wonderful place to grow citrus, and it's something that these folks have done for many generations. They want to continue to do it. Greening has been the most confounding thing we've really dealt with, and now we've got some tools to move forward. So, everybody acknowledges when it comes to these weather events, there's not a lot we can do to combat them. We prepare for them, and then we pick up the pieces afterwards and move on. But when it comes to things that we can deal with, like citrus greening, where we've invested a lot of grower money, state and federal resources in research solutions, and we finally are seeing those solutions, I think that gives the grower optimism that we can move forward, we can see this industry recover, we can see this industry rebuild and do what these growers have done for many generations, and what Florida is known for, if not nationwide, worldwide, and that's producing most of the orange juice that this country has come to know and love.
Matt Joyner is the Executive Vice President and CEO of Florida Citrus Mutual. Coming up, we'll break down the terse yet nuanced language of Amendment 4, Florida's ballot initiative addressing abortion. And as the election draws near, voters are witnessing a steady digression of political discourse into bullying and name-calling. We'll look at ways to alleviate the anxiety caused by the never-ending stream of rhetoric. And we'll meet two Floridians with disparate political views who found common ground through discussion. We want to hear from you. Let us know what you'd like to hear more about or what you're glad you heard. You can email us at engage@cfpublic.org, or you can send us talkback on the free Central Florida Public Media app. In the menu, select Send Us a Talkback, record your question or feedback, then just hit send. And there's always voicemail. You can call us at 407-273-2300, extension 246, and leave us a message. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Richard Copeland, sitting in for Sharon Stone. Ahead on the program, what happens when a former White House spiritual advisor and a proud member of the region's LGBTQ plus community meet to talk politics?
You're a gay man.
Mm-hmm.
So, how did that emerge? What's that like?
I kind of half came out to them in high school.
Uh-huh.
Central Florida Public Media's one small step is facilitating civil conversation throughout the region. On today's Engage, we'll hear the latest installment. But first, hundreds of thousands of Floridians have already voted by mail for the November general election. One of the constitutional initiatives on the ballot this year has to do with reproductive rights. Pro-choice advocates such as the Floridians Protecting Freedom have been working to educate the public on Amendment 4 prior to Election Day, this November 5th. The group was responsible for collecting the 900,000 necessary signatures to get the amendment on the November ballot. Now, in order to pass, 60% of the voters must say yes. Opponents of the proposed amendment, groups like Physicians Against Amendment 4, have been pushing back, arguing that if passed, there would be unintended consequences. The amendment is 49 words long and is stirring a lot of disagreement on what it would do. Central Florida Public Media health reporter Joe Mario Pederson has been breaking down the amendment from multiple perspectives. Joe, thank you for joining us. The wording of this amendment is terse. 49 words, is it?
Yeah, 49 words. It's very short.
Parse out the language and what a yes or a no vote would result in.
Sure. Before I do, I think it's important to remember what the current law in Florida is. So right now, Florida has a 6-week ban on abortion, right? So women cannot receive an abortion after 6 weeks. So what this would do is it would extend the time that a woman can receive an abortion. The amendment has it worded as up to viability. But, generally speaking, it's about like 23, 24 weeks. And it would allow healthcare providers to make that call as far as when that viability has been determined and whether or not there are other complications that need to be considered for that patient. A no would keep things exactly how they are with the 6-week ban in place.
And there's been criticism that the language in the ballot is too vague. They're specifically looking at the word you just mentioned, viability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. So this has been one of the biggest points of contention. So viability, as I mentioned before, somewhere between 23 to 24 weeks as far as the medical community is concerned. But there's no formal definition on viability. That's not something that they are hard line pressed into. In fact, there are groups of people who recommend using the word viability in laws because of how vague it can be. And it's also important to consider Florida does have legal definitions for viability, and that's as far as when a fetus can be sustained outside of the womb through medical means, right? Any medical scientific means.
You identified that as a legal definition. Is that a definition that's acknowledged by the medical community?
It is in the idea that they respect the law, right? But I mean, it's not something that is taught in medical books, right? As far as any students that are studying medicine goes, they're not going to find viability as this hard line term that is properly defined. There's a lot of back and forth on this in medicine.
Another concern about this ballot initiative is that the language doesn't require a doctor to be present during these procedures.
Yeah, that's right. So I guess a more proper way to think about that is the language of the ballot measure broadens it from a physician, which in Florida legally a physician is required to be involved with this process. And this broadens it to the term healthcare provider. Now, physicians see this as problematic. They see this as a physician needs to be involved. They argue about, complicated abortions. However, it should be noted that more than 50% of abortions are induced by medication. And, experts see this as a great place to broaden abortion and make this more accessible to people. Most, if not all, in Florida, appointments have to wait on a physician actually showing up to a clinic, and in which case some physicians are going from city to city, getting to whatever clinic they need to. There's a scheduled day in which the physician will be at the clinic because they're not always there.
And that's regardless of whether you're relying on a surgical procedure or a medicated procedure.
That's right. Yeah, it is required for that physician to be there. So again, this would broaden it to, we're talking about like nurse practitioners or physician assistants.
Now, opponents to Amendment 4 are running ads on Florida TV indicating that the amendment's passage would eliminate any parental control over a minor's decision to obtain an abortion.
Yeah, I suppose there is truth to that, right? So right now, legally, it is required that a child notify the parent and that they receive parental consent if a minor is to receive an abortion. And this would remove the parental consent. However, we mentioned those 49 words, right? The last line of this measure specifically states that it would retain parental notification, which I guess in certain aspects, there is still an element of control there, right? It's not totally out of the parent's power. Now, most procedures, it should be noted, in Florida require parental consent for a minor if anything medical is going to happen. However, Florida has looked into the idea of moving beyond parental consent for emergency situations with minors, and even passed a law a couple of years ago that a physician or medical personnel in a hospital setting or someone who is en route to a hospital setting can make the determination on whether or not they have to step in and perform a medical procedure for a minor in certain emergency situations.
Now, supporters of Amendment 4 have developed a focused strategy to connect with voters. Talk about the outreach to the young voters and how the messaging is being couched.
Pretty straightforward. I mean, the messaging I've heard the most is that they're trying to make people aware of what they call Florida's extreme abortion ban. The 6-week ban, in which they want to remind folks that most women don't even know that they're pregnant at that time, right? So they want people to be aware of what the law currently is, that extreme abortion ban, as they word it, and they also, I guess to borrow your word as far as couching it goes, right? The idea that they want an appointment between a patient and a doctor without the government in the room, right? They don't want, Uncle Sam or, insert government face here to help determine whatever that decision is going to be. They want it to be between the patient and the healthcare provider.
Are we seeing a commensurate outreach effort from those opposed to Amendment 4? And if so, what do those efforts look like? Are they looking to connect with the same young voters that the supporters are?
This is a great question. So from what I've seen as far as oppositional force goes, it's pretty widespread. I've seen folks who are deeply religious and are very much against the idea of expanding on abortion and want to see tighter restrictions on abortion. I've seen they're out there, they're staging their own protests, trying to get the word out on voting no on this. And we've also seen the state of Florida take a stance on this as well, right? At the beginning of September, we saw the State Agency for Healthcare Administration come out with a commercial campaign as well as a published webpage that was talking all about how the amendment was bad for Floridians. However, it doesn't really name any specific examples, right? As far as how bad this would be, it basically says that it would be broadening things and it could remove health guardrails. But when I've talked to experts about that, that doesn't really seem to be the case. The American Civil Liberties Union filed a lawsuit against ACA, and it didn't really go anywhere. And a circuit court judge ruled that ultimately it's not up to the court to take issue with the facts, and the fact finder is ultimately supposed to be the voter come this November.
And we've seen the state go as far as threaten legal action against Florida TV stations carrying ads from supporters of Amendment 4.
Yeah, that's right. I believe it was a couple of weeks ago we saw letters from the Florida Department of Health regarding that. I reached out to the Florida Department of Health specifically about that and wanting a copy of that letter for myself, but they've yet to contact me.
In addition to Florida, there are 9 other states that have ballot initiatives regarding abortion rights in November. How does the Florida ballot initiative measure to those other states? Would it facilitate more permissiveness? Would it be more restrictive than other initiatives?
I can't think off the top of my head anything that was more restrictive, and I'm pretty sure there isn't. There were 3 states that were very similar. Arizona, Montana, and Nebraska were all up to viability, hoping to codify those rights into their state constitutions. Same with South Dakota. However, South Dakota specifically wants to make abortions available up to the end of the second trimester rather than that wording of viability, right? New York was really interesting. So New York is seeking to codify abortion rights, which, for the record, they allow abortions up to 24 weeks, right? They're trying to do this by enshrining this in an equal rights amendment that's already part of their state constitution. However, what's interesting about that is it doesn't actually mention the word abortion, and opponents are trying to take advantage of that. They're seeking to recast the proposal as unnecessary and in a bid to expand rights of migrants as well as transgender adolescents, saying that they're going to use this to receive medical treatment or to get on sports teams to align with their gender identity. So that's a controversy in and of itself. But yeah, as far as more restrictions go, no, I don't believe there are anything tighter.
And finally, assuming this passes, how soon would this go into effect? Is it a next day kind of thing?
Not a next day kind of thing, but it would be a next year sort of thing.
Beginning of 2025. Joe Mario, we can find the first 2 of this 3-part series at cfpublic.org. On Friday, the final piece will drop. Tell us what that'll encompass.
Yeah, so the final piece is really it's the pro-life side of this. I got to speak to people who are actively voting no on Amendment 4 and talking to them about A, why it is that that's so important, and B, why they feel that the Republican Party hasn't really done enough to represent their beliefs on restricting abortion in totality.
Joe Mario Pederson is the health reporter for Central Florida Public Media. Joe Mario, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
A recent survey from Forbes Health asked respondents if they had been negatively impacted by the election. More than 60% said they had. Any presidential election is an exercise in high-stakes campaigning. This year's has become especially vitriolic, with hyperbolic doom-saying, careless scapegoating, and threats of political retribution. Much of the discourse has devolved into name-calling, reminiscent of grade school bullying. A 24-hour news cycle coupled with the obsessive social media habits of many Americans have created a toxic brew, feeding anxiety and stress, with little hope that this would be alleviated after Election Day. So how do Americans maintain engagement with the political process and stay informed during the campaign cycle without accumulating the unwanted baggage of election stress? Sharon Stone posed this question to Shirlette McCullough, a licensed therapist practicing in Winter Park, specializing in addressing trauma and mental health. Sharon began the conversation by asking McCullough how to spot the symptoms of election stress.
There's a range of emotions that people are experiencing during this time, leading up to the elections, feelings of anger, fear, stress, sadness. And to be honest, all of those emotions are valid, during this time of uncertainty. But what we have to be mindful of is, how is this manifesting in our day-to-day lives? How is it manifesting in our thought lives? How is it manifesting in our businesses, with our families, and things like that? That's what's most important.
What are you experiencing as a licensed therapist and counselor? What kind of issues are you hearing from people in your practice?
So I am seeing clients of all ages this season who are wrecked with just the uncertainty of what the outcome is going to be and how is this going to affect their lives? How is this going to affect their rights? How is it going to affect their values and different things like that? So I'm seeing a lot of moderate to severe anxiety right now around this election season.
What do you do? What do you tell people?
So it's like so many people are concerned about what's going to happen, what's going to happen financially, what's going to happen all around. So no matter the uncertainty in this season, there are some concrete, or should I say, there are some proven ways to maintain your well-being. And the other thing that we have to really keep in mind is that even though right now it could be a time of adversity for some people or for many people, we can still maintain our well-being during this time. Stress is the inevitable, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like I said earlier, we have to just be mindful of how is it showing up in our thought lives. So a few things that we can do is own our feelings, right? Those feelings of anxiety, those feelings of uncertainty, we can own those feelings, knowing when it's overwhelming, when it's time to reach out for help. Another one is practicing being present. So all of those anxious thoughts that we're having, they literally rob us of the present here and now. They totally rob us of here and now. They take our energy of the here and now. So practicing being present and focus on now. The other thing is focusing on things within our control. So there are certain things that we can't control, like if our loved ones have a different opinion than we have, or if our loved ones feel a different way about certain topics from either party. Understanding that we can have opposing ideas or opinions, but it doesn't mean that we have to disconnect or not love each other. Another one is knowing your capacity, limiting your debates around either party, knowing when to walk away. Because every disagreement that you have, it's not about winning. And it's okay if you want to get your point across or if the other person wants to get their point across. But what's also okay is that you agree to disagree. The last one that I have is balancing your consumption. So the different things that you're watching on social media, the different news programs that you're watching. Balance that with some humor, with some joyful content, not being all consuming on the elections and what's going on with the elections. Our brains have this unique way of protecting us. Our brain does not like uncertainty. So what we do oftentimes to protect ourselves is we go to the worst case scenario. And it feels comfortable there because it feels like something that is familiar. But understanding that you can have uncertainty feelings, but how we push that uncertainty back is with facts. So knowing the facts, not your friend's opinion, not what you think it is, but knowing the facts. And that helps us maintain our well-being.
I'd like to ask you a couple follow-ups that I think people might be wondering about. Let me start with, what do you do if you find yourself in a conversation with an opposing viewpoint, and especially if that is someone that you just don't want to eliminate from your life? What if it's a loved one?
Right. And that's a good point, because just because we have disagreements, it doesn't mean that we handle that, or the best way to handle it is by disengaging or cutting the person off. We have no control over changing someone's mind. Of course, we want them to understand us, and of course, we want to understand them, but it's okay to disagree or have a disagreement, but we have to think about our singular purpose. And that singular purpose is the value of the country that we live in, focusing on hope and healing and unity.
What would you say to someone who, here's your advice, but we're in the final weeks of this election and they just want to maintain that momentum and passion? How do you do that without sacrificing your mental health?
Well, I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier, balancing that information consumption. It's okay to have your thoughts, your opinions. It's okay to have those things, but when it starts manifesting where it's causing you to be debilitating in work and connecting with people, then it's time to get some professional help to reach out and talk through those things, because during this time of uncertainty, this is major. Let's not minimize what's really going on in our country right now. There are decisions being made outside of our control that's going to affect us and our generations to come, right? So understanding that we can only control so much of that, and staying focused on what we can control. And when those outcomes do come, we can renegotiate what we need to do for our mental wellness.
So, Charlotte, after the vice presidential debate, many people were struck by how different it was to see the candidates, complimenting each other, having empathy at times towards one another. I'm curious what that says to you, what the lessons could be there from your perspective.
So I can see both sides of that. I can see where that could have been alarming, and I could see where that could have been a situation that calmed a lot of people and a direction that many of us would like to see the candidates go towards when they're in debates or when they're communicating with each other. I can see on both sides the positive and the negative. I mean, definitely it is something new for us as the viewers, because that's something that we're totally not accustomed to in the past. We've always seen the candidates become very rude towards each other or not be so professional towards each other. So I think for some people, it was refreshing to see the empathy, the respect, and the debate go the way that it did.
Given the polarization, what do you do about that fear we talked about earlier of the unknown or the panic some people may be feeling right now?
Yeah, so thinking of ways that you can channel that stress and anxiety into ways that you can make change. So volunteering with organizations that you value, that allow you to get your voice heard, that really support the different values that you have. Another one is staying connected to those people that love you, those people that fill you up, staying connected to different areas that are similar to your views, whether that's connecting on gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, all of those things connecting with people who you have common ground with is also a way that helps with mental well-being.
Charlotte McCullough is a licensed therapist practicing in Winter Park. Coming up, Central Florida Public Media's series One Small Step puts Floridians with differing viewpoints together to facilitate civil discourse. Today, we'll hear an area pastor and a theme park performer discover they have more in common than they imagined. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Richard Copeland, sitting in for a vacationing Sharon Stone, and you're listening to Engage. What would you want to know about if you could talk to President Obama's spiritual advisor? And what would he want to know about you? Over the last few weeks, we've been bringing you conversations between Central Florida strangers with differing political views, not to debate, but to find common ground. It's a program called One Small Step. Joining us now to talk about it is Rebecca Fernandez, Director of Community Collaborations with Central Florida Public Media. Rebecca, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Richard.
Rebecca, give us background on this conversation. Who are we going to hear from today?
So in this conversation, we're going to hear from Pastor Joel Hunter. Pastor Hunter is currently the pastor of Action Church in Winter Park. He's formerly the pastor of Northland Church in Longwood, and he's chairman of the Central Florida Pledge. And he sat down with Brandon Martin, whose voice might sound familiar. He is a performer at a local theme park. Let's hear a little from the two of them.
What's it been like for you with people like me, who you go, okay, old white conservative, how's this going to go?
Wary. Yeah. I think being a black gay man in America, there's a lot of hurt around it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to fear and to be wary of. Yeah.
And let me say, just in a way of affirmation, there still is. I mean, there's. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yes. So that's not being paranoid. That's a. There's still so much tribalism, when it comes to religion or even whiteness, that we got a long way to go.
So, Rebecca, you were in the room facilitating this conversation between Pastor Joel Hunter and Brandon Martin. Did it seem like they were both enthused to be there? Did they seem to have developed an amicable relationship in their conversation?
They did. You can really see as the conversation drew on how the two of them could really find a lot of commonality across the differences between them. I mean, really, I don't know that either one of these folks would have found each other in another context. Given the opportunity to sort of sit across from each other face to face and have this conversation, they really got on like good friends.
And Rebecca, Pastor Joel Hunter has a remarkable resume. In addition to being the pastor at Northland Church in Longwood, he was spiritual advisor to President Barack Obama. How did that come about?
Pastor Hunter told a really interesting story about how that happened. Let's take a listen.
In the first debate that happened in D.C., I was slated to ask the first question to Hillary Clinton. And my background, again, is conservative evangelical. And so I asked her a question about abortion, because back in that day it was to be safe, legal, and rare. And I said, so just as, as a conservative, how do we get, how rare can we make it, kind of thing. And she answered, she was always so gracious. And then the next debate was at Messiah College. And I was slated to ask again the first question, and that was to her as well. And I forget what that question was, but during that question, somebody came up beside me and said, "Would you pray for Senator Obama before he goes on stage?" And I said, "Sure." They were going one at a time. And so I went down the catacombs and I'm thinking to myself, okay, there's going to be 20 pastors or religious leaders, and we're all going to lay hands. And it was just him and me in the hallway. Okay. And I'm thinking, what in the world? So they had just beaten us. The press had just beaten the snot out of him that week, and I can't remember what it was about. And I said, Senator, I know you've had a tough week. And he stopped me and he said, no, the single mom who's trying to put food on the table had a rough week. I'm fine.
Now let's go ahead and hear the full conversation with Joel Hunter and Brandon Martin.
Hi, I'm Joel Hunter. I'm 76 years old.
My name is Brandon Martin. I'm 38 years old.
I grew up in a small town where nobody moved, and we lived all our lives together. And I left for college. I never went back. But that was the life I was used to.
I don't know what I can say for the interview, but I perform at a local theme park. I'm a performer, yeah.
Oh, good.
I've been doing that for about 10 years. My family's from the little Caribbean island of Grenada.
Okay, yeah.
But my parents actually met in Brooklyn. and so I'm New Yorker originally, but yeah, of Grenadian
that's so cool.
heritage.
But how did that kind of shape you when you were growing up?
I wouldn't change it for the world. I just love the multicultural element of it. But yeah, a lot of different cultures that come together, and I feel like that's shaped how I see the world. Mm-hmm. Coming from a Caribbean background, and not necessarily, I guess I feel American, but then I don't. I guess I sometimes feel like I'm seeing things from the outside-ish.
I'm trying to think of what I can ask and what I can't ask here.
Go for it.
You're a gay man.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, how did that emerge? What's that like?
I kind of half came out to them in high school. Uh-huh. I told both of them, it was like my junior year, I think. Like, I might be interested in boys. Uh-huh. I might be interested in guys. I remember my mom saying, "But you haven't even dated girls yet. How do you know?"
Yeah.
I was like, "Well, thanks. That's not quite how that works."
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess when came to the end of college and was pretty sure this was who I am, and came out to them, and they accepted me, and I don't take that for granted. That
mm-hmm.
I feel very fortunate, because that's not everybody's experience.
Was it recent enough that that is more socially acceptable?
This would have been like late 2000s.
Okay.
So, yeah, I guess if I think through kind of everything that was going on, by that time, you'd had some states that had legalized gay marriage, mm-hmm. and I don't know. And mm-hmm. I mean, even aside from that, maybe just their own whatever they were thinking about and what was in their hearts. I'm just going to jump to it. This part about being President Obama's spiritual advisor.
Yeah.
So you
weird.
Drop names, name drop.
Mm-hmm.
No, but yeah, how'd that happen?
Well, he called me and was looking at expanding, the advisors he had around him, I think. Up to that time, I was a card-carrying conservative Republican. I've since become independent, but I still remember the day he came out for gay marriage, and I'm driving down 1792 up here, mm-hmm. And I get this call, and he said, "I want to tell you, I just did this interview and came out for gay marriage." Automatically, I said, "Well, Mr. President, I don't see that in the Bible." And he said, "I know, but let me tell you why I did it." And he said, "Every day I pass by in the West Wing this young man who has incredible ability. I also know he has a faithful relationship to his partner." And he said, "It really bothers me that he can't have with his partner what Michelle and I have. Mm-hmm. And it just made, oh my goodness, And so I went back to my congregation and I tried to explain to them, why this was the right thing.
You identified yourself as, I guess, being conservative evangelical.
Mm-hmm.
I guess your journey to that identity.
I grew up in enough of a bubble that I didn't have relationships out of other people, out of the realm of other people like me. And so when Pulse happened, for example, we were a huge church. We were probably the biggest church in Central Florida. And I was expecting, okay, I'm going to get all kinds of calls on this. And no calls came in. And then it hit me. I have no relationships with gay people per se. I mean, there were, of course, gay people in my congregation, but not so they would come and talk to me, not so that they felt safe to reveal that. And I just felt so convicted. And so I went to the pastor of the gay church in town, Joy Metropolitan Church, Reverend Terry, and I said, "Look, I'm not here to discuss gay issues. I'm here. I need a friend. I want you to be my friend, and I want to know you." And we just became the best friends. We still get together regularly. She's a hoot. I think she's just one of the best people I know.
You mentioned Pulse. I feel like Orlando's response to that said a lot about who we are.
Yeah.
And I'll even say I had just kind of moved to the area, a year or so before that, and I think that was the first time I felt like there's a community. I'm a part of this community, and to feel accepted.
Yeah,
I think was a big deal. So yeah.
Yep, I agree.
Rebecca, we know this program runs through the end of the year. What's coming next for One Small Step?
Right now, we're working on conversations between 2 former members of Congress, 2 members of the same church, and a few conversations with college students through a partnership with a UCF class on civil discourse. And we're putting the final touches on an event in early December where you'll get a chance to engage hands-on with the One Small Step questions, hear snips from the cutting room floor, and meet some of our conversation partners in person. You'll hear more from us here on Engage, or stay up to date on cfpublic.org/One Small Step.
Rebecca Fernandez is the Director of Community Collaboration at Central Florida Public Media. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining Engage today.
Thank you.
That's all for today's Engage. Join us Tuesday at 3 p.m. when we break down the Amendment 2 ballot initiative addressing Floridians' right to fish and hunt. You can catch a podcast of today's program at our website, cfpublic.org. You can also find us on the Central Florida Public Media mobile app and on Spotify. I'm Richard Copeland. Thank you for joining us. All Things Considered is coming up following NPR News.